Hey guys, I know the Slender Man movie is coming out in less than a week and I'm getting pretty excited. So today I thought we'd talk about a Japanese version of the Slender Man called the 8-Foot Woman, or Hashakusama. This name can be broken down into Hachi, meaning 8, Shaku being a unit of measurement equivalent to about a foot, and Sama being a polite version of Mr. or Mrs. I've heard this story read a few times, and a lot of people refer to her as Hachishakusama, which is not incorrect. It is just that many Japanese people say Hashaku instead of Hachishaku. So when you encounter Hashakusama, she will be very tall, about 8 feet. Judging by the name. Judging by the name, she'll be about 8 feet tall. It is said that she wears a long white dress and a hat. The strangest thing people notice is that she makes this very creepy sound. Po, po, po. Hashakusama mainly goes after children, and when they hear that sound, po, 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 that means she has marked you for death. And during the nighttime, she'll come to your house and kill you. Now, I'm going to read you a very popular story about Hashakusama. This story is a little long, so grab your blanket, grab a nice cup of tea, and let's get started. My grandparents lived in Japan. Every summer, my parents would take me there on holiday to visit them. They lived in a small village and they had a big backyard. I loved to play there during the summer. When we arrived, my grandparents always welcomed me with open arms. I was their only grandchild, so they spoiled me. The last time I saw them was the summer when I was 8 years old. As usual, my parents booked a flight to Japan, and we drove from the airport to my grandparents' house. They were delighted to see me and had a lot of little presents to give me. My parents wanted to have some time by themselves, so after a few days, they took a trip to another part of Japan, leaving me in the care of my grandma and grandpa. One day I was playing in the backyard. My grandparents were inside the house. It was a hot summer's day, and I lay down on the grass to rest. I stared up at the clouds and enjoyed the feeling of the soft rays of the sun and the gentle breeze. Just as I was about to get up, I heard a strange sound. Po, 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 po. I did not know what it was, and it was hard to figure out where it was coming from. It sounded almost like somebody was making the noise themselves, as if they were just saying, po, 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 over and over again in a deep masculine voice. I was looking around, searching for the source of the noise, when I suddenly noticed something on the top of the tall hedges that enclosed the backyard. It was a straw hat. It was resting on the hedge, and it was behind it. That's where the sound was coming from. Po, 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 po. And then the hat began to move, as if someone was wearing it. The hat stopped at a small gap in the hedge, and I could see the face peering through. It was a woman, but the hedges were high, almost 8 feet tall. I was surprised at how tall the woman was. I wondered if she was wearing stilts or something, or some sort of high-heeled shoes. Then, a split second later, she walked off and the strange noise disappeared, fading into the distance. Bewildered, I got up, back into the house. My grandparents were in the kitchen drinking tea. I sat down at the table after a while, and I told my grandparents what I had seen. They weren't really paying attention to me until I mentioned the distinctive sound. Po, po, po. As soon as I said that, both of them suddenly froze. Grandma's eyes grew wide, and she covered her mouth with her hand. Grandpa's face became very serious, and he grabbed me by the arm. "This is very important," he said, in an intense voice. "You must tell us exactly. How tall was she?" "As tall as the garden hedge," I replied, beginning to get scared. My grandfather bombarded me with questions. "Where were you standing? When did this happen? What did you do? Did she see you?" I tried to answer the questions as best I could. He suddenly rushed out into the hallway and made a phone call. I couldn't hear what he was saying. He looked over at my grandma, and she was trembling. Grandpa came barging back into the room and spoke to my grandmother. "I've got to go for a while," he said. "You stay here with the child. Don't take your eyes off of him for a second." "What's going on, Grandpa?" I cried. He looked at me with a sad expression in his eyes and said, "You have been marked by Hashakusama." With that, he hurried out, got his truck, and drove off. I turned to my grandmother and cautiously asked, "Who's Hashakusama?" "Don't worry," she replied in a shaking voice. "Grandpa will do something. There's no need to worry." We sat nervously in the kitchen, waiting for my grandfather to come back. She explained what was happening. She told me that there was a dangerous thing haunting the area. They called it Hashakusama because of its height. In Japanese, Hashakusama means 8 feet tall. It takes on the appearance of an extremely tall woman and makes the sound po, po, po in a deep male voice. It appears slightly differently depending on who sees it. Some say it looks like a haggard old woman in a kimono, while others say it is a girl in a white funeral shroud. One thing that never changes is the fact that she is 8 feet tall and the sound she makes. Long ago, it was captured by monks, and they managed to confine it in a ruined building on the outskirts of the village. They trapped it using 4 small religious statues called jizo. They placed these on the north, south, east, and west of the ruins. It was never supposed to be able to move from there. However, somehow it managed to escape. The last time it appeared was 15 years ago. My grandmother said that anyone who saw 8 feet tall was destined to die within a few days. It all sounded crazy. I wasn't sure what to believe. When my grandpa came back, there was an old woman with him. She introduced herself as Kei-san, and she handed me a small crumpled piece of parchment saying, "Here, take this and hold it." Then, she and Grandpa went upstairs to do something, and I was left alone in the kitchen with my grandmother again. I needed to use the toilet. Granny followed me to the bathroom and wouldn't let me shut the door. I was beginning to get really freaked out by this. After a while, Grandpa and Kei-san took me upstairs and brought me to my bedroom. The windows were covered in newspaper, and there were lots of ancient runes that had been written on them. There were 8 small bowls of salt in all 4 corners, and a small Buddha figure placed in the center of the room. There was also a bright blue bucket. "What's that bucket for?" I asked. "That's for your pee and poo," Grandpa replied. I don't know how I read that with a straight face. I'm like 5 years old. Kei-san sat me down on the bed and said, "Soon, the sun will be setting, so listen carefully. You must stay in this room until tomorrow morning. You must not come out under any circumstances until 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Your grandmother and your grandfather will not speak to you or call you until then. Remember, do not leave under any reason until then. I will let your parents know what is going on." She spoke in such a grave tone that all I could do was quietly nod my head. "You have to follow Kei-san's instructions to the letter," Grandpa told me, "and never let go of the parchment. If anything happens, pray to Buddha, and make sure that you lock this door when we leave." They walked out into the hallway, and after saying goodbye to them, I closed the bedroom door and locked it. I turned on the TV and tried to watch, but I was so nervous. I felt sick to my stomach. Grandma had left some snacks and rice balls for me, but I was so nervous I couldn't eat them. I felt like I was in prison, and I was very depressed and scared. I laid down on the bed and waited, and before I knew it, I was asleep. When I woke up, it was just after 1 a.m. All of a sudden, I realized that something was tapping on the window. I could feel the blood draining from my face, and my heart skipped a beat. I desperately tried to calm myself down, telling myself that it was just the wind playing tricks, or maybe the branches of a tree. I turned up the volume on the TV to drown out the noise. Eventually, it stopped altogether. That was when I heard my grandpa calling me. "Are you okay in there?" he asked. "If you're scared, you don't have to stay in there all alone. I can come in and keep you company." I smiled and rushed over to the door, but then I stopped in my tracks. I had goosebumps all over my body. It sounds like Grandpa's voice, but somehow it was different. Oh, that's creepy. I couldn't tell what it was, but I just knew. "What are you doing?" Grandpa asked. "You can open the door now." I glanced to my left and a chill went down my spine. The salt bowls were slowly turning black. I backed away from the door. My whole body was trembling in fear. I fell to my knees in front of the Buddha statue and clutched the piece of parchment paper tightly in my hand. "Please save me from Hashakusama," I wailed. Then I heard the voice outside saying, "Po, po, po." The tapping on the window started again. I was overcome by fear, and I crouched there in front of the statue, half crying and half praying for the rest of the night to end. It felt like it would never end, but eventually it was morning. The salt in all 4 bowls was pitch black. I checked my watch. It was 7:30 a.m. I cautiously opened the door. Grandma and Kei-san were standing there outside waiting for me. When she saw my face, Grandma burst into tears. "I'm so glad you're alive," she said. I went downstairs, surprised to see my father and mother sitting in the kitchen. Grandpa came in and said, "Hurry up, we've got to get going." We went to the front door, and there was a large black van waiting in the driveway. Several men from the village were standing about it, pointing at me, whispering, "That's the boy." The van was a 9-seater, and they put me in the middle, surrounded by 8 men. Kei-san in the driver's seat. The man on my left looked out at me and said, "You've got yourself in quite a bit of trouble. I know you're probably worried. Just keep your head down and shut your eyes. We can't see it, but you can. Do not open your eyes until we've got you safely out of here." Grandpa drove in front, and my dad's car following behind. When everyone was ready, our little convoy started moving. We were going fairly slow, around 20 kilometers per hour or less. After a while, Kei-san said, "This is where it gets hard," and she started muttering a prayer under her breath. That's when I heard the voice. Pull, pull, pull. I clutched the parchment in my hand. I kept my head down but peeked outside. There, I saw the white dress fluttering in the breeze. It was moving along with the van. It was Hashakusama. She was outside the window but keeping pace with us. Then suddenly she bent down and peered in the van. "No!" I gasped. The man beside me shouted, "Close your eyes!" I immediately shut my eyes as hard as I could. I tightened my grip on the piece of parchment, and then the tapping began. The voice became louder. Pull, 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 pull. There was a tapping on every window, and the men around me started muttering. They couldn't see her, but they could hear the tapping on the windows. Kei-san started praying louder, and she was almost shouting. The tension inside the van was unbearable. After a while, the tapping stopped and the voice disappeared. Kei-san looked back at us and said, "We're safe now." All of the men around me breathed a sigh of relief. The van pulled over on the side of the road, and the men got out. They transferred me to my dad's car. My mother held me close, and tears were running down her cheek. Grandpa and my father bowed to the men, and they went on their way. Kei-san came to the window and asked me to show her the piece of parchment she had given me. When I opened my hand, I saw that it had gone completely black. "I think you will be okay now," she said. "But just to be sure, hold on to it for a while." She handed me a new piece of parchment. After that, we drove to the airport, and my grandpa saw us safely on the plane. When we took off, my parents breathed a sigh of relief. My father told me that he had heard about the 8-feet-tall woman before. The boy disappeared and was never seen again. My father said there were other people who had been liked by her and lived to tell about it. They all had to leave Japan and settle down in foreign countries. They were never able to go back to their homeland. She always chooses children as her victims. They say it's because children are dependent on their parents and family members. This makes it easier for them to deceive, and she poses as their relatives. He said the men in the van were all blood relatives of mine, and that's why they had been sitting all around me, and why my father and grandpa had been driving in front and in back. It was always done to confuse Hashakusama. It took me a while to contact everyone and to get them all together, so that's why I had to be confined in the room all night. He told me that one of the little Jizo statues had been broken and that's how she escaped. It gave me the chills. I was glad when we finally got back home. All of this happened to me more than 10 years ago. I hadn't seen much of my grandparents since then. I haven't been able to as much as set foot in that country. Afterwards, I would call them every few weeks and talk to them on the phone. Over the years, I tried to convince myself that it was just an urban legend, and that everything that happened was just some elaborate prank. But sometimes I'm not so sure. My grandfather died 2 years ago. He was sick. He wouldn't allow me to visit him. He had left strict instructions in his will that I wasn't allowed to attend his funeral. It was all very sad. My grandmother called a few days ago. She said that she had been diagnosed with cancer. She missed me terribly and wanted to see me one last time before she died. "Are you sure, Grandma?" I asked. "Is it safe?" "It's been 10 years, she said. All that happened a long time ago. It is all forgotten. You're all grown up now. I'm sure that won't be a problem." But what about Hashakusama?" I said. For a moment, there was a silence on the other end of the phone. And then I heard a deep, masculine voice saying, "Pull, pull, pull, pull." I don't know about you guys, but that last part really got to me. That was really creepy. So, what do you guys think about Hashakusama? Do you think she's real? Were you creeped out by the story? What would you do if you encountered Hashakusama? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. And if you really like this video, please hit like and subscribe. I'll see you guys next time.